Hey guys, Sean here. Welcome to the F1 Word and to the Canadian Grand Prix debrief. Now there is one big topic to discuss that will pretty much dominate this video, so I'm going to jump straight into it and start by having a look at the race result. Lewis Hamilton was classified as the winner of the Canadian Grand Prix ahead of Sebastian Vettel, but that does not tell the full story, as I'm sure you'll all remember. Charles Leclerc was third in the second Ferrari, with Vettel Bottas in fourth for Mercedes and Verstappen recovering well to fifth for Red Bull. It was a very good weekend for Renault, Ricciardo in 6th and Hülkenberg 7th. Pierre Gasly in the second Red Bull was only 8th. Lance Stroll recovered well to 9th and Daniel Kvyat rounded out the top 10 for Toro Rosso. Carlos Sainz was 11th for McLaren ahead of Sergio Perez in 12th and Antonio Giovinazzi in 13th. It wasn't a good weekend for Haas. Grosjean came home in 14th ahead of Raikkonen and Russell, with Kevin Magnussen all the way down in 17th. And Robert Kubica was last of the classified runners, with Alexander Albon and Lando Norris both retiring. Right then, there is only one place to start, and that is with the incident between Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton, which led to the German being slapped with a 5-second time penalty. I will say straight off that, as ever, I will try and be balanced in this debrief, look at both sides of the arguments and the rules and all of that. But if you are looking for an immediate hot-headed reaction to what happened yesterday, you can check out the race reaction stream, which I'll link on screen now. In case you missed it, Vettel was leading the race, but Hamilton was closing him down and piling on the pressure. As the German approached turn 3 on lap 48, the back end of the Ferrari wouldn't stick to the track and he cut across the grass. As he rejoined the track, though, Hamilton had to get out of it to avoid contact, and Lewis said over team radio, quote, "He came back on the track so dangerously." The stewards did decide to investigate the incident and ultimately gave Vettel a 5-second time penalty. The stewards reviewed video evidence and determined that car 5 left the track at turn 3, rejoined the track at turn 4 in an unsafe manner, and forced car 44 off the track. Car 44 had to take evasive action to avoid a collision. Now, according to Autosport, the stewards made their decision based on the second steering input after they believed Vettel was back in control of the car at that point. Basically, they apparently took the view that after he had bounced off the grass and onto the circuit again, he had been able to regain some control as he had begun to steer the car to the left. However, what they're saying is a split second later, the footage slowed down apparently shows Vettel release the steering wheel, allowing the car to drift to the right and close off Hamilton. It is believed that that alone was the deciding factor in the stewards' unanimous decision. They also looked at CCTV footage which shows Vettel's head move to look in his mirrors to see where Hamilton was as he released the steering wheel to the right. We don't usually get to see that CCTV footage, but on the onboard footage you can see Vettel looking in his mirrors. The stewards, again, apparently felt that had Vettel have kept steering to the left once he was back in control, there would have been enough room for Hamilton on the right-hand side and probably wouldn't have warranted an investigation. It is also pointed out that telemetry shows Hamilton had to brake to avoid a collision. I'm going to stress this again. This is all according to Autosport, hence my liberal use of the term apparently, and I will put a link to that article in the description down below. What did the drivers have to say about it all then? Well, as you might expect, Sebastian Vettel was not at all happy about the decision and does not believe that he should have been given a penalty. I rejoined the track and then Lewis obviously had to react. I don't know how close it was or how close he was. Once I looked in the mirror, he was sort of there, but for me, that's racing. I think a lot of people that I just mentioned earlier, the old Formula 1 drivers and people in the grandstands and so on, would agree that this is just part of racing, but nowadays it's just, I don't like it. We all sound a bit like lawyers and using the official language. I think it just gives no edge to people and no edge to the sport. Ultimately, it's not the sport that I fell in love with when I was watching. The German did go on to criticise some of the previous decisions made by the stewards, and that his frustration was not just based on what happened in Canada, but with the sport's ruling as a whole. Lewis Hamilton said, though, that having watched the replays of the incident, he would have done the same as Seb, but did go on to add that he does believe the penalty was justified. I watched the replay and it was obviously very close. What I can say is that if I was in the lead and I made a mistake and went wide, I probably would have done the same thing because it happens so quick and you're just trying to hold your position. When I say I would do the same, I would try to squeeze him too. That's ultimately what happened. Say you didn't have that rule, I would have kept it lit and we would have crashed, so one way or not, it was going to go badly. It is a natural instinct that you have. You're not going to go, actually, I better pull to the left and let everybody go by. He did block me, but unfortunately he went off track, and the way the rules are, that's how it's described. It doesn't end there though. Ferrari have stated their intention to appeal the decision, and this is where it all gets a little bit confusing. According to the rules, they can't actually appeal it. Article 17.2 says, appeals may not be made against decisions concerning the following, penalties imposed under Articles 38.3a. And that article itself refers to a 5-second in-race time penalty, and within Article 38.3, it reiterates this point and reads, If any of the 7 penalties above are imposed, they shall not be subject to appeal. So again, on the face of it, Ferrari cannot appeal. However, they can apparently appeal the decision to penalise him, effectively the incident itself. Look, I'm not going to say any more on the official stuff regarding that because the rules just aren't really all that clear, surprise, surprise. But I really doubt that would go anywhere. Imagine the precedent that would set. Based on some race weekends, it would be weeks before we got a definitive race result. But I guess for now, watch this space. The F1 fan base is still understandably pretty wound up today and opinions do definitely differ, but I would say that the majority still feel the penalty was wrong and unfair. Here's the thing though. Having had time to sit and go through replays, explanations and the rules, by the letter of the law, as much as I hate saying it, the penalty is correct. I still don't really agree with it, but more with the rule now than the actual incident. My view hasn't really changed all that much in that regard, but as Vettel touched on, this is a wider issue. The rules in F1 at the moment do not allow for close racing and drivers are forever having to think twice about moves because they could be penalised. Or at least that's how it feels on the outside looking in. A lot of people are saying that Vettel did not intend to block Hamilton and that he was not in control of his car. And whilst I agree to a point, I don't think for a second it was intentional. The rules do not allow for intent or even mistakes to be taken into account. They are very much black and white, and that's another issue. F1 is not black and white. No two incidents are the same. But trying to think of another example, a few people have thrown up Verstappen in Japan last year with his move on Raikkonen. Again, by the letter of the law, that penalty is correct. But I said at the time, and I still believe it now, I don't think there was any intent there from Max. But again, the rules do not allow for that to be taken into consideration. So, because of the way that the rules are written, the stewards' hands are pretty much tied. So to sum up my thoughts, rather than ending up on another massive rant like we did last night in the race reaction stream, my view hasn't really changed all that much. The only difference is that I've been able to spend some time looking through everything to try and understand the decision made. I guess what I'm kind of saying is that now I've calmed down and I'm nowhere near as hot-headed and ranty as I was, I'm able to look at it from the steward's perspective. And once again, based on the way the rules are written, the stewards made the correct call. But I really do think that some of these rules need to be looked at for next season, maybe 2021 at the latest, to allow drivers to race hard. Because the second half of that race was awesome. 2 drivers, 9 world titles between them, pushing to the absolute limit and racing. Racing. That is what we should be talking about, not the flipping rules. What I will finally add on this though is that ultimately Vettel made the mistake. Alright, yes, his rear end got away from him and he had to bail out of the corner, but it was still a mistake. And whether it is liked by some or not, if Vettel doesn't make that mistake under pressure, the incident does not happen, there is no penalty and he probably wins the race. When the dust settles, and it will, it was another mistake from Sebastian Vettel. Super quickly, because I do need to move on from this one, Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes was investigated after the race for the hydraulic system change that took place prior to the Grand Prix, and there were some question marks over whether or not the team had broken Parc Fermé rules. However, the stewards found that the car was compliant with the regulations, as the new system was an identical specification to the one they had replaced. As for their teammate, Charles Leclerc was apparently not told about Vettel's penalty, and the team have said that they simply forgot to tell him. Now, of course, there are some questioning whether or not he would have been able to push harder and take that second place had he known, but in all fairness, he was already pushing pretty hard. On the final lap alone, he was half a second quicker than his teammate. So, I'm not really convinced telling him would have made all that much of a difference. In fact, Charles has since said that he would not have changed his approach had he known about the penalty, and that he was already pushing very hard to try and catch them. Leclerc's race, though, was, I would say, a little bit of a quiet one. He did lead for a while during the pit stops and the team chose to run him long, which at the time felt like the wrong call as he ended up rejoining behind Max Verstappen after his stop, although it didn't take all that long to get past him. But looking at it again, I do wonder if Ferrari were hedging their bets a little bit and hoping for a safety car. Another one of those strategies where if it comes off, you look like an absolute hero, but if it doesn't, you look as though you've made a mistake. Valtteri Bottas, for me at least, wasn't great over the weekend. He made a mistake on his first run in Q3 and then had a very scruffy second run which ultimately left him out of position. And in the race, he ended up finishing 51 seconds off his teammate, and although he did make an extra pit stop which would account for some of that gap, he would still have been over half a minute behind. I mean, the Finn did spend a lot of time behind Nico Hülkenberg, which absolutely won't have helped the situation. And he did say after the race that every time he got close to the car ahead, his brake temperatures ended up too close to the limit and so had to lift off, making it harder for him to fight. At the end of the day, though, the Finn did acknowledge that ultimately he lost the race due to his qualifying errors. He's taken a bit of a hit in the Drivers' Championship as well. He needs to bounce back straight away in France. On to Red Bull then, and Max Verstappen was caught out by the red flag in qualifying, which saw him start out of position. He originally qualified 11th, but was of course promoted to 9th following Carlos Sainz's penalty and Kevin Magnussen needing to start the race from the pit lane. The Dutchman started the race on the hard tyres but struggled initially due to the lack of grip they offered. We were the winners in the end with that one though, because that did mean we got to watch a great scrap between him and Lando Norris. Max ran long on his first stint, taking the tyres 48 laps before pitting and, as with a few other drivers, was able to deliver good consistent pace on them. Speaking after the Grand Prix, Verstappen described his race as controlled and admitted that 5th was the best recovery he could hope for, as he did not believe Red Bull had the pace to challenge the leaders. It was a controlled drive today. We stayed out of trouble at the beginning of the race. You see that McLaren has a good top speed because they drive with less wing. That is why he could overtake me. I did not want to take any risks, so I stayed behind him. When his tyre started to trouble him, I was able to overtake him. It is so hard to overtake here. It is hard to follow. I did a very long first stint which worked quite well. I tried to preserve my tyres and then the competition in front of me had to pit. But we were not quick enough to catch the leaders. There was not much more I could do in the closing stages. I think realistically 5th was where we expected to finish. It was at least fun doing a bit of overtaking and we scored good points again. It was a solid recovery from Verstappen and he once again delivered a mature drive. As for his teammate though, well, he just was not good enough on Sunday, was he? With Max out of position, it was the perfect opportunity for Pierre to show everyone what he could do and take the fight to those ahead, perhaps even pip his teammate to 5th place. But he never really challenged anyone and spent a good chunk of the race behind Lance Stroll, and I don't mean right on his gearbox either. He was consistently between 2 and 3 seconds behind, and he didn't even look as though he had the pace to fight the Renaults. After the race, the Frenchman did say that the car felt good and so he was disappointed to finish where he did. He also added that he struggled with traffic and that led to a lot of brake saving, which I guess would explain some of his lack of pace. Such a shame because, like I say, the race was set up perfectly for him to silence some of his critics, but he's really got to step up and he's got to do it quickly. Let's run through the rest of the field then, because there were 14 other drivers out there on Sunday, believe it or not. And it was a fantastic weekend for Renault overall and a much needed result to give their low-key start to the season a proper kickstart. Daniel Ricciardo was brilliant in qualifying and fought hard during the race to lead home his teammate. In all honesty, the pace wasn't really there to challenge the likes of Bottas for long, but he certainly gave it all he could. He did make a couple of defensive moves that were a little bit late and perhaps a little bit close to the edge, and that was when he was trying to fend off Bottas, but to be honest, I think it was okay. The weaving on the straight was trying to break the toe, and as far as I know, that is well within the rules. I mean, it was all very close, but just hard racing in the end. Nico Hülkenberg was solid and consistent all weekend, but that's pretty much what we've come to expect from him over the years. He was within half a second of Ricciardo come the end of the race, so nothing really between them in the end. But his race was very much made by his impressive first stint on the soft tyres. All the talk prior to lights out was that the drivers would be lucky to get the softs any further than lap 10 at the absolute most. However, he actually managed to take them 16 laps and he kept up a decent pace with them too. It is also worth noting that Renault did issue team orders, basically asking the drivers to hold position, and according to Cyril Abiteboul, Hülkenberg was, quote, a bit upset. Racing Point had a mixed weekend. Both drivers struggled in qualifying and Sergio Perez never really looked as though he had the pace to challenge for the points on Sunday. And as you saw earlier, he finished a fair way off the top 10. After the race, Checo said that the car simply lacked pace, and coupled with the fact he got caught in traffic and that he had to really look after his brakes, 12th was about the best he could manage. He did have a good scrap with Grosjean, by the way. There was a little bit of contact as the Mexican made his way past the Haas, but it was all just good, close, hard racing. His teammate, though, delivered another absolutely cracking recovery, but I'll talk a little bit more about Lance Stroll later on. Sticking with the story of mixed weekends, I guess Toro Rosso were very much in the same boat. Now, I believe Daniel Kvyat was caught out by the red flag during qualifying, but I doubt the pace was really there for him to sneak into Q3 anyway. But at the end of the day, where it mattered, Kvyat still managed to bring home a point on Sunday. The Russian said that he did not want to finish 11th and was determined to snatch that final point, hence the really good scrap with Carlos Sainz towards the end of the race, and it was a good solid move with just a couple of laps to go. Alex Albon though, well, it was just not really a very good day for him. He was pinned between a Racing Point and an Alfa at the start, made contact and lost his front wing. That was pretty much the end of his race from that point. Certainly his hopes of challenging the top 10 were gone. Albon did say that he was struggling with long run pace, and Franz Tost explained that they decided to retire him later on to save mileage on the power unit. Despite showing good pace in qualifying, McLaren ultimately had a weekend to forget. Carlos Sainz was penalised after quali for impeding Alex Albon, and that saw him drop 3 places on the grid. The Spaniard had to pit early in the race after a visor tear-off got stuck in one of his brake ducts, which of course caused them to overheat, and he was pipped to the final point towards the end of the race by Daniel Kvyat. I will say though, he did a pretty decent job to get his tyres to run 67 laps, even if he was struggling on them at the end. On the other side of the garage, Lando Norris had a very weird day. As the TV cameras picked him up, you could see damage to his right rear, and it looked, on first impressions, as though he had made contact with the wall of champions. However, as it turns out, an overheating rear brake caused his suspension to fail, or at least that's what the media have been putting it down to. The team, on the other hand, and this is at time of recording, have simply said that there was a mechanical issue. Norris himself did mention overheating though, but that they need to fully investigate what happened. Really weird one. Once again, it was another very disappointing weekend for Alfa and Romeo. Antonio Giovinazzi did manage to outqualify Kimi Raikkonen on Saturday and finished ahead of him during the race, although Kimi did make an extra pit stop and was close to his teammate come the end of the Grand Prix. Gio was involved in that first corner incident with Albon and had a spin later on in the race as well. The Italian did say post-race though that he felt the pace was there to fight to make up places in the end though. That spin cost him a lot of time. Raikkonen, just like Sainz actually, had a visor tear off stuck in his brake duct which compromised his Sunday. The Finn feels differently to his teammate however and does not believe that the pace was there in the car to challenge those ahead. And team boss Frederick Vasseur has said that the team are working hard to understand the performance issues they've encountered recently and is confident they will find form again. It wasn't the best of weekends for Haas either. Kevin Magnussen crashed out heavily in qualifying which brought out the red flag and ultimately prevented his teammate from improving his lap time. Romain Grosjean was the fourth car to get caught up in that first corner incident and had to take evasive action, cutting across the first chicane, and even had to push debris out of his cockpit. But the Frenchman concedes that at the end of the day he just didn't have the speed to fight in the race. As for K-Mag, he had a miserable weekend, I think it's fair to say, and described his Sunday as the worst experience he has ever had in a racing car, and that was over team radio for the world to hear. His engineer did try to calm him down and pointed out that the mechanics had been up all night trying to fix the car that he'd crashed for the race, before Gunther Steiner stepped in and told the Dane that it wasn't a nice experience for them either, and that enough means enough. After the race though, Kevin Magnussen did come out to clarify his comments and praise the mechanics for their hard work. There was nothing meant to the team over the radio. They did an amazing job this weekend. I made a mistake in qualifying and they've been able to build me a completely new car for the race today. We just have these tyres that don't work in the race for us. It's hard to not be very disappointed. I know the whole team is. They deserve a lot better. And finally, it is Williams, of course. George Russell dominated his teammate in the race, finishing around 53 seconds up the road. Robert Kubica did make an extra pit stop though, but that only accounts for 18 to 20 seconds of that lead, so he will still have been well beaten. The poll did say that he struggled with the hotter conditions, high fuel loads and long race stints, and that all left him with very little grip. In fact, he did also state that the grip was just lacking in the car overall. Russell though said that his car felt relatively nice to drive, but he feels that it still needs a fair bit more downforce. Overall though, he was pleased with his own performance. Now Sebastian Vettel was awarded the Official Driver of the Day award, and although he did drive well for most of the race, he did make that crucial mistake which ultimately contributed to him losing the win. And so for that reason, he is not my driver of the day. Instead, I've gone with Lance Stroll. The Canadian started all the way down in 17th place after yet another poor showing in qualifying. However, as you saw earlier, he managed to make his way all the way back up to 9th and pick up a couple of really crucial points for himself and the team. His first stint was impressive. Not only did he take the hard tyres 45 laps, but he did manage to maintain a really solid pace and, as touched on earlier, was never bothered by the faster on paper Red Bull of Pierre Gasly. A really strong drive from Stroll, a very good recovery, and of course it was his home Grand Prix, so a massive bonus for him there. Deserves a lot of credit for that drive. Also, Max Verstappen deserves a lot of credit as well. He made his way back from 9th to 5th and absolutely deserves to be mentioned among the Driver of the Day candidates, if you like. But I've got a feeling that Daniel Ricciardo could well be many people's winner of Driver of the Weekend. Before I go then, let's have a look at the championship table, starting with the drivers. Lewis Hamilton stays top on 162 points now, with teammate Valtteri Bottas in second on 133 and Sebastian Vettel third on 100 points. Max Verstappen is fourth on 88 with Charles Leclerc in fifth on 72. Then it's Pierre Gasly on 36. Carlos Sainz still heads the midfield despite not scoring this weekend, 18 points for him. Daniel Ricciardo jumps up to 8th on 16. And then it's Kevin Magnussen on 14 and Sergio Perez on 13, rounding out the top 10. In the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes are still well gone at the top, 295 points for them. Ferrari second on 172 and Red Bull are third on 124. Then comes Formula 1.5. McLaren top that on 30 points with Renault. That looks much better for them, up to 5th place on 28 now. Racing Point, they are 6th on 19 points. Toro Rosso have 17 and Haas on 16. And then come Alfa Romeo in 9th place on 13 points and Williams still prop up the table and are yet to score. That is it then for the Canadian Grand Prix debrief, but don't forget you can let me know your thoughts about yesterday's race in the comment section down below. I wonder what topic will dominate. Now, I will be back soon with more content as ever, but in the meantime, don't forget you can follow me on social media. The links to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course to Discord are all in the description down below. But as ever, thank you for watching. I've been Sean, this has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.